Hey, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Mitch Payne. I'm an OCT from Ops Group Charlie, MCTP at Fort Worth. We're going to be talking over a couple of things today. We'll get into some introductions real quick. But next slide, what we're going to cover today is, for this brief, is kind of two main topics. Just a broad overview of what we're doing, and then a brief specific about MCTP as an organization, some of the capabilities we bring to the fight, and some of the capability gaps, and some of the things that will help frame some of the problems that you guys are looking at. So without any further, so again, I'm Mitch Payne. I'm a C2 OCT, Colonel Henderson. He is our Chief Ops Group, and then we've got in the back the fellow OCTs back there, Rodney.
Major Mountain, one of the fellow OCTs. Lieutenant Colonel Apple, one of the tree maneuver OCTs.
Lieutenant Colonel David Peters, a sustainment OCT.
Ryan Johnson, Fires OCT.
Terry Riesel, Engineer and Protection OCT.
Mike Jaskowitz, Exercise Control, MCTP.
And as you can see, we've got
And James Watts, Aviation OCT on the slides.
Sir, you
Well, you guys know me for the most part. Colonel Matt Bunch, Brigade Commander.
CSM Steve White, Sergeant Major Dave Moore, Major Brian Jones, Brigade XO.
And Lieutenant Colonel Pete Anzavino, the Brigade S3.
Don.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel, I'm the Chief of Plans and the Sims Officer.
Is Eric in here? All right, yeah, stand up, be recognized.
Hey, Colonel Eric Tolska, DCO, Aviation.
And then for the command teams, I know we've got y'all up front as well.
Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Lieutenant Colonel Zach Pearson, FA Battalion Commander.
I'm Major Pilot FACSU.
Lieutenant Colonel Tammy Johnson, Sustainment Warfighter Battalion.
And I'm John Bridge, command one of the infantry battalions, Sergeant Major
Ray Hendrick.
Jesse Seha, Infantry Battalion.
Sergeant Major Shealy, Infantry Battalion.
Lieutenant Colonel Jason Allen, EEV Commander. My Sergeant Major is TD by this week.
Major Adam Press, Brigade S1.
Okay. Staff, any other?
Captain Gary, Brigade S2.
Major Christian Mustin, Brigade S4. G. Dalton, Brigade S6.
Okay. Any other teammates out here? All right, awesome.
Do we have anybody from 1st Army or Div East? Yeah, could you guys also?
I'm Major Holiday, working the Exercise Branch Headquarters, First Army.
Dwayne Hibben, G3, Flex, and a whole bunch of everything up there at Division East.
Sir.
So real quick, why are we here? Let's put some framework around this problem. So what is the unit of action right now in the Army? Who can tell me? The division. We've shifted from brigades to divisions, right? We were very brigade centric. We weighted everything toward the brigade, everything from man training and equip to everything we were doing. We have now switched to the division, right? This switch started on paper about 5 years ago. About 6, really. We're getting into another year. So what is going on? So we reorganized in MCTP, and I'll just be brief, but we reorganized. We had 5 small ops groups and 2 large ops groups, right? You had Alpha and Delta that went out and did ASCCs, corps and divisions, right? And I'm going to date myself, but I've been here long enough that I did a year in the old construct, and then we reset, right? So all those smaller ops groups fell under the 3 main ops groups, which were Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. So Delta became Charlie, Alpha stayed Alpha. They got lucky, they didn't have to change logos or signs or anything else, right? And then Bravo became, our legacy Bravo kind of was the nucleus from our fires guys that became the nucleus for Bravo, okay? So at the core level, Alpha does all the Army service components, okay? And then they do the corps. And then we have 2 teams that just focus on the division and they're traced down brigades, right? So when you go to a warfighter, you have this thing that's called training audience, right? Does everybody kind of know what I'm talking about, the construct? So you have a training audience. And then you have response cells and work cells and enhanced response cells. We got this whole litany of folks that are involved in the warfighting. So when we reorganized, we brought all those folks. I went from about 48 to 55 people. You know, it was kind of my sweet spot for our manning. It was actually like 58 on paper, but you're never full up, right? So when we did that, I went to about 100 to 102, and which means now we're manned at like 80-some%. Which means also as the division becomes a unit of action, I need AOCTs, right? I need augment-TOCs that come out and help us out. You're part of that pool, okay? The training units that are coming in, the division staffs and the division folks, if they can free them up, usually I call the chief of staff, couple warfighters out from theirs. It's a dialogue that starts, you know, about a year out, and then I'll get some guys from that division to come. What a great experience. Anybody come out to a warfighter before? Raise your hand. Or if you participated in one. Okay, good deal. So about a third. Okay? That's good. So as we do this and move forward, as the Army is focused on this, General Agudo came out of his warfighter, right? 3ID commander, and now who's General Agudo? Yeah, he's the first Army commander, right? So this is gaining traction. I've had multiple conversations with General Agudo, and this kind of started at his warfighter. He saw the value in sending people out early. He saw the value of the Op4 ride-along, which is another thing for your intel folks. If you can send them out, we're more than happy to give them an Op4 ride-along so they can see how the Op4 functions, how the Op4 works. It's not just two guys with, you know, chain smoking cigarettes moving stuff around. It's a whole team of teams. So as we do all that, we are shifting everything we do at the training level to the division. And that takes a little bit of effort and a little bit of time, right? So I went from, usually I would have one senior mentor, just so you understand the effort we're putting in this. I now have 9 senior mentors, between 3 and 1 stars, any mix. Usually I have about 1 3-star, 2 to 3 2-stars, and then the remainder is 1 stars. They come and help us. So they're in each warfighting function, right? And then usually the senior mentor, and then 1 or 2 extras in specific areas where we pull them or where the CG requests it. Because it is the division commander's training event, right? Everything we try to do is based on his training objectives and where he wants the division to go. And people will always ask me, how do I win a warfighter? Mike, how do I win the warfighter? Especially if I have a relationship with that general, I've either worked for him or been around him. And, you know, in my mind, winning the warfighter is training the staff, right? So they can accomplish the task you want them to. They can present information in a way that you can process it, and a way that it can be pushed out to the subordinate commands. So, you know, as you're doing this, as you're going through this, think about how you're going to interact with folks. And I know you've already thought about it, you have multiple experiences already, but think about that. Think about how to make the staff better. In our ops group especially, we won't watch somebody frown. Okay, if someone's having a hard time and they're not going to get it, this isn't NTC, right? This isn't JRTC or, you know, pick your CTC. We will help, okay? And when I say help, I don't mean do the work for them, but help coach them through it, give them examples. The stumbling blocks are just stumbling blocks if you don't make them a trip, slip and fall hazard, right? You can navigate that stuff. But as we move forward, especially in MCTP, we are really trying to bring more rigor for the division, and at the same time bring more training to the division staff. And then enough people to support that training so that they can move forward and provide the boss what he needs. With that, I'll kind of pause there. That's probably enough opening comments. Does anybody have any questions of me? You're an easy crowd. So you guys already know it. With that, I'll turn it over to Colonel Watcher.
Appreciate it. Hey, good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Now, I'll try and be brief, but as I've told a lot of you before, when you give an 06 the podium, we like to stand up there and talk. So I'm going to do a little bit of talking. First, I want to thank the MCTP crew for coming down here and providing support. You know, he said why MCTP is doing what they're doing, why they are here, is because we are getting ready to provide support to the 28th Infantry Division. Then we're going to turn the corner and then start focusing on the 42nd Infantry Division as they go through the same training pipeline and glide path to do the mission that the 28th is getting ready to go do next fiscal year. So we'll go through a series of command post exercises with 28th. We'll go through their culminating training exercise September, October this year, and then we'll push them out the door, and then we'll get set for 42nd. The MCTP didn't have to do this. They typically are resourced to train active component divisions and to provide training support similar fashion to what we do to all divisions, including the National Guard. And so theirs is more like their away team, sort of what we do with an XETC, something like that. They're providing OCT support. What they recognize and what I asked for, what I informed them is this group, great group of OCTs. We came from last summer where we focused at the Regimental Combat Team with 278, and now we're going to turn and go to a command post exercise where we're being asked to train a division. Okay, and that's kind of a big mental leap. Some of you have experience working at the division. Most of you do not. To include me, I've worked at a 2-star level command. I've been an aide-de-camp in a division headquarters. But if you ask me if I've really been a staff officer on a division staff, nope, I hadn't done it. And so what I have done in several different lives in my military career is run exercises. I ran the exercise program at U.S. Army Pacific for a brief period of time. I ran the exercise in Japan for about a year and a half. Then Southeast Asia and Oceania for the remainder of my time there. The one thing that's common, regardless of whether you're talking about small level, squad, platoon level exercises focused on peacekeeping operations, or 3-4-star Army level exercises focused on large-scale combat operations, near-peer competitors, is you have to understand a little bit about the organization that you're going to train, what it looks like, who they are, their purpose, their reason for being, and in the context of what they're going to be asked to train in. So in this case, large-scale combat operations. We have some of that knowledge, but MCTP does this month after month, year after year. I've been around and kind of familiar with MCTP since they were BCTP, if you want to really date us over here. And they've trained corps and divisions as long as I've been in the Army. So they've got some institutional knowledge, not only with the green suits represented in the room, but the tie guy in the back who's probably been there for longer than anybody that's on active duty that's been serving in MCTP. And so they know how to do what they're doing. And they, out of the goodness in their hearts, came here and they're going to share and impart some of that knowledge to us. So that's what the focus they're doing here, is to provide a little bit of the flavor of what a division staff is required to do, how they're organized, what they're doing in large-scale combat operations, and a little bit behind the curtain of what MCTP does, how they organize for combat, and then how they actually are structured to give feedback and provide support to the division. All of you can do it. Every single OCT sitting in this room can walk into a division headquarters and be value-added. But I want to give you a little bit of training, a few reps and sets, so that you have confidence in your own ability to go in and execute that mission. Make sense? All right. And I'll pause there, and if anybody's got questions, comments, please fire away. All right, I'm going to turn it over to the experts. Lane, over to you.
Well, we'll still look for the experts, but until we find them, I'll be here. All right, James. Hey, so I'll let you guys get a chance to kind of read through this. I don't want to sell your intelligence. But this sums up basically what you heard your commander talk about. This is the problems that we're looking at. And really, this is the end state we're trying to get to with them. So as you're reading this, and just something we've continued to reemphasize here, we are all OCTs. And so we're not here to tell you how to be an OCT. Like you guys are trained and certified, you guys do that. I had the opportunity to serve in the First Army before, so I've got a little bit of flavor of what you guys, the problem sets of what you deal with. what we are here to do is, as they talk about, is for the division-specific fight, that's where there may be somewhat more of a knowledge gap. So let me ask you this. Anyone here serve on a division staff? I think you just talked about the warfighter experience a little bit back there. Okay, got it. So as we look at that, what were some of your experiences like with serving on a division? In the back, I saw your hand going.
Doing, a lot of USR, I've certainly been,
Okay.
yeah, doing strength management, decentralized across 18 different installations. We did some different warfighters in Korea and various tabletop exercises. There was a 20 Marine Command, a very unique type of unit, managing 10 EOD. We had 2 EOD groups and a 48 Chem Brigade, so very interesting organization.
Okay. What else? And we had some, I know there's some hands up here that serve. Just tell us a little bit what your experiences were like on that divisional organization.
So I'm dating myself now. So back in 2013, on 2nd Infantry Division, one of the things I did notice during the exercises was the transition out of the coin mentality to the actual, the art of the mission command at the division level. So not only, the adjustment from coin to a decisive action, but also the transition from the BCT to the division and what the commander needs to know, what their current operations cell, or what everybody needs to actually worry about and report and staff. So there was a pretty big adjustment for that, I would say, when we actually did our first exercise.
Sure.
So that's one of the things I noticed, that the division fights much differently than a BCT.
And those are two fantastic points. Divisions are just a lot of things they do, and you'll see this in follow-up groups. A lot of what they do are going to be similar to what you see at a battalion or brigade level, But the scope of complexity, the response, the toys you have to play with, things you have to integrate to use all that and maximize the combat power you have, as well as the scope of the mission set specific to large-scale combat operations, LISCO. It complicates things to a far greater degree than you may have seen or experienced in the past. Let me reframe the question here. How many of us have been to an NTC or JRT, a CTC rotation the last 3-4 years? Show of hands. What was it like? What was your experience like at that CTC rotation?
It was great, sir. I mean, it's busy, lots of moving parts, of course.
Okay.
I was on the logistics side, sir. But, it was good. I mean, it's a lot to handle and to tack into such a small time frame.
Okay. And then again, compounding that, and this is certainly a point you guys know, is that our Compo 2, Compo 3 brothers and sisters, they got, 29 training days in a year to knock out the same level of requirement. And so they've got to figure out how to crack that in a way, that maximizes their utility, but that also talks about all of those complex problem sets that brings in all the unified action partners. And that hits on all those things in the truncated time. So as we move on from here, and as we talk about this, this is going to be a very discussion-based thing, and so please interact and dialogue with us. This is not meant to be us talking. It's not meant to be us up front talking. It's us dialoguing back and forth. And then two, ask questions. If we don't have an answer, I promise you, I will try not to tap dance, but I will get back to you with an answer or products or doctrine or basis for that. Okay? So just continue asking, because we're at the end of the day, we're here to help enable you to train the 28 to make sure they can take care of that mission. Any questions, comments? Okay, next slide. So this is the schedule for the we're currently in the internal organization brief, and we'll continue on to C2 for division operations, and then we'll get into the intel brief as well. We've broken it down by warfighting function. So across the board, that's what you can expect. In the morning, we've typically done the seminar level, so that'll be the kind of the big group. And then in the afternoons, we've got the breakouts, and and you'll see that on the next slide. The breakouts are broken down by warfighting function, and so you can kind of pick and choose to go to that. They're meant to be very low threat, And it's very much discussion based as well. So if anyone's got any questions, concerns, those are the ways that we're going to get after some of those, some of the ways that we address the problem statement we just looked at and get to the end. Any questions, comments, concerns overall? This is what you can expect over this week. I will say that we've got a lot of flexibility and fluidity built into this. So if we go one-on-one, that's okay. We can adjust fire with that and current lunch, at your discretion, and we can kind of wrap up. Questions, comments, concerns? We'll put these back up at the end of this, in between breaks and whatnot too, so you can kind of figure out where we need to go. So, this is, go ahead, next one. This is what Mission Command looks like. Now, this is what MCTP looks like. As Colonel Manner described, MCTP is not just one of the options. It is the whole structure, the whole hierarchy of what we do there. We exist to train and prepare divisions for execution of the warfighter through the execution of the warfighter exercises. And our focus, as we said before, is on large-scale combat operations. One of the critical things here is that we are just, Oxford Charlie is just a very, very small component of the overall architecture of MCTP. And one of the things that makes MTCP, and as we go through here, we'll talk about this a little bit, some of the things that make us unique as an organization. But again, drawing from your experience, anyone been a puckster at a warfighter? Anybody know what I mean when I say that? In the back, I saw your hand going.
They're the people that control the simulated units.
Yeah, okay. So you're playing on like some 1970s technology, right? I mean, anyone else had experience in this? Right? What was it like?
So I was pucky, and it takes hours and hours to do anything, and sometimes the higher headquarters ask for information that the scenario doesn't replicate. Like, guys, a small engagement, they say, what building did the enemy run into? You saw him run into something, you have to kind of fill the gaps.
Sure. So that's, and that's, there's certainly some things we'll touch on, continue to touch on that. The critical takeaway is that MCTP, and for a successful exercise, this isn't just meant for warfighter, but for your CPX-3 and everything else too. You've got lots of other moving parts that are more than just the OCTs coming in from the top and kind of making observations across the board. Let's move on to the next chart. So, specific to an exercise, so the last chart talked about our general structure of MCTP. Within an exercise design, you've kind of got these 5 different layers of exercise control across the board. And as you can see, we right here make up this small piece, and that's what you will be able to replicate for 174 specifically. You've got other organizations, and as we go on in this brief, we'll talk about some of those, that will replicate the exercise control group, the senior controllers, as well as the workstation controllers in the back as well. Some of the things that make it interesting or make it useful in MCTP is that a lot of these things are organic to each other. So we have a working relationship with the work cell controllers. We have those things. And those are some of the friction points you guys have seen, is that because you've got MCTSP coming in to cover down on some of these other things, you don't have those organic working relationships. So you can't walk up and like, hey, Jim, tell me what's going on with work cell stuff, right? And that's going to provide a layer of friction there. Certainly nothing you can't overcome. But that's just something to be aware of as well, is that you don't have those inherent relationships between your high-con, ex-con, your organization, and then your other OCTs across the board.
So I'm going to pause you here just to kind of jump in. So most of you've all been to JRTC or NTC, right? Okay, so I'm going to draw a bit of an analogy for you, advanced analogy. An exercise is an exercise is an exercise. So forget the core icons, division icons for just a minute and just bear with me, all right? So I talk about the higher command. If I'm talking in the framework of a JRTC or an NTC, this is, I think they call it the 56 or a 52nd ID, right? That's who up in Ops Group, the Lizard team, or JRTC, whoever they have in their Ops Group, is using to kind of transmit down. And when you start talking about the division, if you're at a JRTC or an NTC, the training audience there is the brigade headquarters. The battalions are down here, and so we look over here, that's Bronco Group, or whichever critter team down at JRTC covers down brigades. And to the left here, when you start talking about the OCTs, that's your other critter teams, your Sidewinders, your Cobras, so on and so forth. Or at XCTC, this was all you kind of covering down in the sticks lanes. And this over here was sort of the brigade headquarters staff with Colonel Turner and his team at the regimental staff. No real HICOM to speak of there, but similar to what the focus is, this is a division, if they're the primary training audience, they're the focus. And right, wrong, or different, the response cells that are down below, really they are simply secondary training audience at best, but they're there to provide a stimulus and feed to the primary training audience, so they're able to get the information flow up, to manage crunch information, to make the decisions necessary to do what they need to do as division staff. Make sense? Right. Or battalions are out doing what they're doing at NTC, they're reporting up, and the brigade is there synchronizing the fight, because the information is all coming up from the brigades, and the brigade staff is crunching that information, using the battle rhythm to feed the brigade commander so they can make decisions. Similar, just bumping up in it. I say just bumping up in echelon, as Colonel Payne mentioned, it's a just bumping up, but it's quite a bit more complicated because of the different toys and where they fit in the battlefield framework. Are you guys going to cover battlefield framework? Okay, good. Right. Okay, that kind of makes sense? Right. Again, you guys have all done similar things. What I'm trying to do here is connect it with your experience, make it a little bit easier for you to anchor into and latch on.
And just to piggyback off what you said, a couple critical things is one of the perks of being at that OCT level right here, working directly in training lines, is you have the most interaction with training lines. More so than the response cells, more so than HICOM and XCOM. Like, we have the privilege of working with them and kind of seeing that training audience develop. And so we got that in the joy and interaction and our ability to interact with them and watch them improve and get better. And I know that for me, that's first system I find very rewarding is when I see that training audience stumbling through something on day 1 or 2, kind of, hey, pulling aside, hey, guys, this is some things that are not working out, or hey, we're taking notes and see you talking, it's probably going to be a helpful thing, right? Sorry, I'm just going to toss it out there. Free chicken. And then watching them kind of adjust their systems, adjust fire, kind of, and then get better, by the end of that warfare. It's, I think as an OCT, it's certainly one of the best things you have. Next slide. So within this, and what we're doing is I'm just taking that kind of top portion of the slide from the previous one, comparing it to what you got specific to CPX3. At least the products that we got may be somewhat dated from when we got them to what they are now. But this slide, all it's doing is comparing the generic exercise control here with the specific exercise control plan you guys have for 20 to 90. Sir, any other comments, discussion points across the top?
The only, kind of asked First Army Div East, I'm not sure where General Landis, General Guda, I don't think General Guda participated necessarily, but I think General Landis' intent is to come down for this exercise. We'll kind of figure out where we're working in, but at best, he probably, to the left or to the right of General Cormac, we're serving him instead of General Gudo as the exercise director, so that General Cormac can focus on kind of staff.
Sir. Okay. A couple of notes with this specific too is with this, and this is particularly with your HICOM here, a couple of things to keep in mind. As you look at the organization, what that leads to, the HICOM here and the exercise control group, even if they're not organic, they have a really big part to play in your data collection. So as you're making observations, right, and we'll talk about this in a future brief, you've got to make observations that are targeted on a certain, you've got to identify your trends and kind of collect the data that shows that, right? I mean, it's pretty intuitive, but if you don't do that, it helps focus your collection so you can kind of tell that coherent narrative to the training audience. Hey, you did not do this well. Well, let's keep you didn't do this well because there was not a good synchronization, prior to. You didn't synchronize it because you didn't address it at the car. Like you came up with the car, but no one actually talked about it. So this is why your birds got shot down on the LZ and the aerosols, because you didn't synchronize the fires maneuver in time across the board, and that can have been identified at combined rifle. So your ability to kind of peel that back across the board is tied to the identification of the theme. Your HICOM and your exercise control group, they will help drive some of that data collection, if that makes sense. And that's one of the key takeaways from this. Next slide. So not to overwhelm you, everyone likes to put up charts and lots of colors. But at a generic warfighting exercise, and I will again reiterate, what you guys are looking at is a CPX-3, not a warfighter, but to a degree we try and replicate what we can across the board for that. At an exercise, this is the package that, a typical package that OCT would send, that MCTP would send. And I pulled this from one of our recent warfighters across the board, so names don't matter, but the point is, you see a lot of depth and coverage by a warfighting function, and as well as in terms of experience. You know, just organic to MCTP, we've got a lot of senior field grades and lieutenant colonels, because that's the people in MCTP. And so, to a degree, you've got that. What this does allow us to do is provide 24/7 coverage of a training, not smothering it, certainly not doing that, but by warfighting function, we can be there. You've got the depth across the board to kind of look through that, right? And so while you may not have the same depth of experience, you've certainly got a similar number of people who can kind of put the box in to provide that good coverage of the organization. Next slide. But this is where we start to get into our secret sauce, right? These are some of the things that make MCTP special for MCTP, and everyone tells me I'm special all the time. I get that. Pause for the laugh. You know? Okay. All right. What we have here is our analysts. All these guys are generally retired lieutenant colonels. They've got a wealth of experience across the board. They have a lot of Army experience just because they're retired officers. They've got much more MCTP experience. And by and large, one of my counterparts pointed out to me, all these folks are also Melfort qualified as well. So they've got the schooling and the background to kind of talk about what those things are. For us specifically, they also form the backbone of our AAR formation repository. So these guys are the ones that kind of crunch that stuff. We provide the observations, we feed it to our analysts, and they help provide that, nested with the themes that we talk about. They help provide those AAR comments, they build the slides, they ensure the little things like making sure the slides look right across the board. I mean, those things are a mark of professionalism across an organization. And they are the folks that help us out with that. And we will continue to talk about how we do AAR specifically at the back end of this week. Next slide. And so briefly, this is a copy, this is a screen capture of the ESMD you guys have thrown up against the 28th. And I know it's probably dated. And then, sorry, I know your planners had expressly told me some of the requests for forces that you talked about to mitigate some of the gaps that you may not have in an organic organization. So acknowledging this is dated, let's go to the next slide. The reason I bring it up is because when you put this and this together with this, you get this. And I'm kind of a nerd. I'm not a smart man. I'm an armor officer, so I just don't lift heavy things. I can throw a ball really far over my head, so apparently that's really helpful now. But when you do the math on this, you know, you got to take your boots off to get to some of these things. But there's a differentiation in some of the numbers of just bodies we can throw against a problem. Not quality of person, not quality of OCT. Just got a lot of bodies to throw against it. You got to keep in mind, this is not, you guys are looking at a CPX, not a warfighter. So there's a differentiation there. But it's worth noting. Then you've got this. And then here are sort of some of the critical coverage gaps. And this is based on what's organic to your organization, based on your TA, ESMD. And as we talked about, you've got some of the lethal and non-lethal areas covered through requisitions. I'm certainly not trying to tell you guys how to crack that. I'm just acknowledging that there is that differentiation there. One of the critical areas we did identify was the USAF, the Air Force component. And I don't know if that's, I don't know if the plans or exercise team, if you guys got, if you've addressed that or haven't a way to kind of come down on that. We're usually going to rely on cross-training some of the fires elements to talk about that. I'll open up.
Not something we really looked at yet. So,
Okay.
That's actually one of the things I was hoping to pull out. So we kind of compared against previous First Army running CPXs. I wanted to see how you run an exercise.
Yes, sir.
See what you throw at the problem. There's a couple of differences in how the exercises run. They're not running 24/7. That reduces my manpower requirement a little bit. This is more revealing in terms of the actual coverage gaps that we might have.
Yes, sir. I know we've looked at some non-lethal stuff there as well, but some of the other enablers, when we talk about that, one of the first questions I asked at the very beginning was like, hey, what are all the toys the division gets to play with, right? Because you gotta look at that and cover down and how you integrate those things. Because frankly, if you've got nobody looking at the information or cyber officer, you're not going to think about, one, you're not going to provide OCT feedback for that individual, but two, you will be hard pressed unless you're very deliberate about that. Just look at how the division is integrating those elements as well. So those are a couple others with regard to just a couple gaps to look at. And it's worth, as we're here for the week, pick our brains. Ask us these questions. Don't ask me now because I don't have an answer for you. But ask us these questions about how we could look at covering down on some of the Air Force, space, cyber, and soft elements with it.
Who do you normally use for the Air Force? Most of those are Army, those are service specific, but Air Force obviously is across the country. So we're sitting in a joint base.
Yes, sir.
May be able to tap into them.
Yeah, we have an Air Force attachment again to MCTP, sir. So, I mean, like I said, part of the special sauce is that we've got these brothers and sisters in blue right next to us, so we're able to kind of tap into that and center all the time. Any other questions? Terry, in the back, please.
One of the things that he covers here is gaps, but one thing that First Army can provide better than MCTP is non-commissioned officers. I've seen, we've had augments and warfighters, we've had NCOs, and they were more effective training the NCOs and staff at that brigade. And that, part of it was, more reception, but that technical expertise that the NCOs brought to the fight was better than we could have.
Okay. The reason I flipped ahead is because nested with each other was great. I promised that wasn't set up for that. But so the other part of the secret sauce here, right? The other thing that kind of makes MCTP special, and I use that word very deliberately, is the senior mentors that we have. The senior mentors, right? So I'm gonna couch this other part in terms of rank overreach, right? At MCTP, you've got a lot of majors, you've got a lot of lieutenant colonels, but the people we're mentoring, the people we're talking and partnering with at the division level, those are all CSL selected, division primaries, former battalion and brigade commanders, or the division commander. The 1-stars, you got to get some props in, right? And so, to some degree, major pain talking to G3 being like, sir, with all due respect, your systems are screwed up and your plans aren't going to work. That may not be the most helpful way to talk about that, right? Like, I mean, I don't know what your experience has been, but the G3 is like, hey, thanks, bud, and we drive on. So our ability to interact with the highest echelon of the division leadership is to some degree mitigated by the rank that we have, right? That's kind of what it is. The way we get around that is through the senior mentors. We got this, and that is the other thing that makes MCTP a unique organization. We have this deep bench of experience across the board. And the first way they help is they provide the guidance for us for collection. So they will identify, hey, we're seeing some of these things, OCTs, might want to look at this. And that provides us data to kind of have a nested framework to talk about areas they can improve. Obviously, because of their experience, they bring a lot of that just senior leader experience running these organizations. And then the third point here, and that's really what I mean to, is they have that ability to provide that candid feedback. So, if you as a junior lieutenant colonel are watching your chief of staff not effectively run meetings or anything like that, your ability to talk to the chief may be mitigated, but you can come to the senior mentor and say, hey, sir, if we're seeing this, the senior mentor can, hey, chief, let's have a chat. again, to some degree, it's entertaining, or not entertaining, it's an informative discussion between that previous senior man who's done it and the chief who's now receptive towards it. So the reason I say that is because you're going to have to look at ways to leverage experienced officers to replicate that, because you're not going to get that same degree of mentorship across the board, right? And to some degree, I think there's some things organic. And so I'm certainly not trying to tell you how to crack this egg at all, but the use of your CSL ability, leadership at the kind of the front table across the board on that, to partner with those division leaders, I think is helpful. And gives the fact that you've got a breakdown by warfighting function here, it gives you some degree to talk by warfighting functionality across the board as well. With your maneuvers, looking at potentially the chief of staff and the G3 partnership, as we in that. I would also submit, sir, and I think we talked about this before too, specific, again, not trying to tell you how to crack the egg, but a couple of things, resources you have is utilization of strags. They provide that as well. And then, so, and then as my counterpart Terry pointed out, two things you guys bring to fight that we don't bring to fight just because of the way we are designed is your NCO experience. You have the NCOs that provide that degree of subject matter expertise as well, that I think a lot of times the senior leaders of the division will find helpful as well to get that kind of discussion. And so, to some degree, NCOs, you're kind of charged as well to kind of be that backbone of the Army as well. And so, to that degree, you have an opportunity to go speak. You can speak candidly to someone else where, just because by virtue of your position and your experience, where some of the other more junior leaders may not have that same ability. You can say things to a Division G3 sergeant major that a captain couldn't say. And the G3 should be more receptive. And that's just the way it is. And there are some things you have organic to you that we don't have that can help provide something like that. So any other questions, comments, any insights, thoughts? Okay. Hey, so last chart of this, and then we'll take a break after we get through this. So this is specific to CPX3. So one of the joys of being at MCTP is you get a chance to kind of refresh yourself on doctrine. So recently they published two bits of doctrine, TC60, which is published in March of last year, and TC60.4, which is published April 19. They outline training standards specific to CPX3. So this is what the Army says, out of CPX3, the division should be able to do. So the .04, which is right here, is kind of specific to division commanding. So after CPX3, the division commander should be able to do these things. The 6.0 takes that division commander framework and spreads it out over three other kind of areas. So you've got the division commander, the division staff, the command post itself, and then you have the digital crew of all those. So the 6.0 right here is more holistic. Across the whole division, this is what the division should be able to do out of a CPX3. This is pulled, I summarized some of the stuff on the table, but to a large degree it's pulled straight out of that TC doctrinal foundation. So one of the things I would ask, and this is something you may not have an answer to, but do we know if the training audience has adjusted their training objectives specific to the CPX? And it may be worth asking a question by warfighting function or within your specific staff functionality.
So yeah, I'll kind of talk CPX3. So at one point when we kind of started this training glide path, CPX 1, 2, and 3 were just informal terminology used to denote in time and space where we were at with relation to a warfighter, where we were at with relation to a CPX. There wasn't a formal set of objectives outlined in any doctrine that kind of told you what CPX 1, 2, or 3 were supposed to be. Again, I'm kind of dating myself because I came into this job and we started talking CPX 1, 2, and 3. It became quickly apparent that what I meant, what 28th Infantry Division meant, was a little bit different than what 1st Army, Colonel Overland as an example, was talking about in CPX3. It's not a bad thing. It's just there's a bit of a distinction I'm going to make with the 28th ID, because their CPX3 is really a last tune-up before they get to their culminating training event. And in General McCormick's mind, because he just did Warfighter 2103 or 4 last year, he's re-rolling that scenario and essentially looking at it as somewhere between a true CPX-3 and a Warfighter. Okay, in terms of the training objectives he's trying to achieve and what the exercise actually looks like. They don't have necessarily the benefit of the robust backbone that MCTP brings to the fight, but they do have some of the toys. WarSim is a simulation driver and backbone for the exercise. They have MCTSP that are bringing in some of their experience and some of their expertise to help run the event. And of course, First Army and what we're going to bring in terms of the OCT training support and how we're kind of helping to round out the exercise control and to run the exercise. All right. One thing, a couple things I do want to point out. This is a good chart. So we look at the staff and we start talking about the Warfighter or CPX. The CPX that is designed to train staffs, right? You don't have a habitual training audience like you do in a field training exercise that's putting up a real-time stimulus for a staff. You got a simulation and response cells that are pushing all that information up. So we start talking about synchronizing ops. You're synchronizing what the response cells are doing. So the response cells, don't lose sight of what they do. They're very important in terms of their role in the exercise. Most of you are not going to find yourself on a response cell, only like in an extremist case where we can't replicate a response cell. But if you do, what you do and the signal you provide in replicating a brigade combat team or sustainment brigade or whatever response cell you happen to be replicating is very important to the trained audience. Kind of same for the HICOM. The synchronizing operations, integrating the C2 system, this is a very simple way of saying they're collecting, they're managing, they're analyzing, they're crunching, they're filtering, they're disseminating information that's coming up, coming down, coming in, and going back out to the rest of the division. The C2 systems is not just the mission command systems. This guy, he's a C2 system, a man to the role in the division. He is there to make decisions, provide guidance, and to help the staff or to use the staff to synchronize what's going on in the division. Right. So kind of a simple way, but when I start pulling integration and synchronization, I start pulling that out and look at what that means. Now we're talking about the battle rhythm. We're talking about the targeting process. We're talking about all those things that MCTP is going to kind of go over and discuss over the next 3 days. So don't miss that. A simple way, but there's a lot of information that's crunched down into one table. Okay, so it's a good one. It's a good reference point to go back to when you kind of think, what is the purpose of this CPX that we're actually going? What is the division commander driving towards? What does the staff need to do? There it is, right there.
And just to, again, piggyback off that, if you're a doctor nerd and you want to get into this a little bit further, the TCs themselves, they describe each one of those things. So if you want to really look at that in terms of helping drive exercise design and specified training objectives to CPXs, those would be something that you can get into the doctor and get much further than just kind of this wave top discussion here. I would submit to, and again, just to continue what Colonel Bunch has discussed there, looking at some CPX to be specific training objectives, they might look like something, like when you talk about integrating C2 systems, it may be something as simple as like, do all their mission command systems work and do they have all their patches installed? Like if the toys don't even work when you turn them on, like that's going to be problematic. Or for the division commander, is he able to clearly articulate his visualization to facilitate that rapid decision-making process that divisions have to do? Those are some of the things, and we'll touch on some of those a little bit further as we talk through this, but just to kind of prime the pump across the board. Any questions, any other comments with regard to sir?
So I'm just going to make one comment. So at CPX2 and CPX3, what is the most important thing the unit needs to focus on? Anybody want to hazard a guess? What will keep the warfighter, their actual warfighter, from starting on time? Their system's not working, right? If ATADs, I can go down the list of systems. General Hogue calls them the gunculators, right? All those things that process information, pull and push information. But if those systems don't work, they're not, and that's what he's referring to when he says patch is not installed. There's people at different times of fielding, right? And we all see this. You need to understand where your unit is in time and space, where they are as far as fielding equipment, and what the workarounds are going to be, okay? They're going to use the old system will work. You know, it's that if-then logic trail that goes through that, right? Doesn't work, then we need to do this, that, or the other thing. But it has to be figured out early, and it's got to be set up. For CPX3, you know, if they're not going to operate on fiber during the Warfighter, which 99.9% of the time they're not, their CPX3 needs to either replicate that, or you have to understand their plan, and then when they set up for the Warfighter, they need to do it early enough that they test all those systems. Because this will be the bane of your existence. If you get them to the start line, and someone fires the gun and they can start running, they'll start. It'll all be good. But if they can't get to the start line and getting to the start lane, is all those C2 systems and all the other systems working? Does everybody understand? I mean, I know it sounds simple, but boy, oh boy, let me tell you what. I mean, this isn't just a conflict 2 or 3 problem. This is an Army-wide problem. We're fielding CPCE, right? And some people are still using CPOF, right? I mean, there's all kind, and then you'll have a conflict 2 unit come in that's still using CPOF, and the other headquarters is using CPCE. There's workarounds to all that, but my point is, all that has to be a known before we go into the warfighter. Make sense? And that's where you can help to make a huge impact, is helping them get up and ready to go and ready to start the warfighter by that CPX3 systems. Make sense? All right.
I'm just a dumb number officer, but it's really hard to shoot a tank gunner if I can't get my tank out of the motor pool. So, to that degree.
I just wanted to illustrate one real-world problem, that the colonels are talking about here with the systems in a National Guard specific division. I learned a little thing in the S6 world called IAVA security patches, and these National Guard STAMIS systems that they're talking about, these guys only drill 1 weekend a month. These are 30-day patches, and they literally have to come in. An E3 or E4 or E5 operator has to come in every month on his drill weekend and load these security patches into their AFA tags, into their TAEUS. I mean, that's my realm, obviously, but all your other systems as well. You miss 1 month of security patches, next month on your drill weekend, you got to do 2 months worth of security patches, and 3 months. And if you're getting a net piece of equipment that you never had before and it sat in your warehouse for 4 months while your property book officer was waiting to field it, it's missing 6 months worth of security patches. And that hamstrung a staff. And I'm talking, this is not the captains and majors, this is your E4, E5 system operators that are sitting there waiting for security patches. So that, and just to illustrate with the 28 specifically, that is happening right now. We're getting ready for a CPX 1, 2, and 3, but they better be updating those patches now, otherwise we're going to be drinking a lot of coffee on the first day of the exercise.
Hey, you're spot on. The problem is, if that's not taken care of at CPX3, there's usually not enough time before we start the warfighter to do it all.
They got to be doing that on their drill weekends now.
And again, I had the opportunity to serve the next in the First Army as well. So I never did the judicial type stuff, but the experiences I had at the XBTCs certainly proved that to be true as well. Like, we never saw the brigade give the mission command systems up. They're always fighting off the map and off analog, which is good training. It's great. At a divisional warfighter with a digital sim, it's a little bit harder to replicate that on a map. Not impossible, but just something to be aware of. Next slide. Hey, so this is kind of some of the stuff we talked about here. And again, I don't want to belabor the points. Any other questions, comments? What are we missing? What are we not talking about here? Any burning questions? Go ahead.
One thing, Mitch, I was talking to Brigade X3 about it. I know that you said you ran for 24-hour logs, and then whenever you kind of get that potential capability gap or CPA, the CPX3 and minimum is going to only be a 12-hour operation. I assume the CPX2 is as well. So we won't really need to have the man to cover 24-hour ops.
Agreed.
Agreed. So I just want to make sure that was clear. Yep. And then I think any help you can give us with regard to grading, right? So like sort of Air Force personnel, sure. Who do you have on your team? Is what we know, JFOs, JTACs, what kind of ranks? Okay. The parent role of the division, I think, is helpful.
We also use special stats.
asking basically what from the 505th, the first detachment that we bring to help OC the Air Force side.
Right, and then how can we replicate that or find the same type of people with the
Yeah.
MLSs and the rank structure? You don't need to answer that now.
Yeah, so I can give you the first part of that. So we have the 505th detachment is based out of Leavenworth. Their whole purpose is to augment ROCs and look specifically at the ASOSs that compose the Air Force part of the JAGIC. And they also, there's other folks and agencies that replicate the Air Operations Center and the BCD and all those elements. So typically what we see on the ground is we'll get a major, usually with TAC-P background or somewhere on the airspace side, that'll come down and they'll basically be my counterpart, and together we will OC the JAGIC. As far as what you can do to come up with solutions to kind of replicate that and bring that knowledge down, off the top of my head, I don't know. We'll have to sit and brainstorm and think where you could pull that from. Later this afternoon and potentially tomorrow when we talk JAGIC operations, I'll give you a list of things to look for that your fires guys, when they're OCing the JAGIC and working with the division cell, they can look for those things and have certain indicators of things that are going well or poorly. So I'll give you those tips, but it's as far as getting someone with that requisite background, we'll have to think through where you could draw that from.
Ryan, if I can
Yeah,
add a
go ahead,
couple
Mike.
of points. The end result of a training event is a better trained unit. You have what you have to execute. You heard Mitch and Colonel Mena talking about capability gaps. Not everything that a unit gets to exercise and gets to plan is going to be executed in the simulation. The simulation is just one of many tools that are there to help train that unit. It's not the end-all, be-all of the training event, right? Even if I don't have Air Force personnel with that expertise, I do have the manuals. I do have the expertise and the understanding of what the JAGIC operations entails. And you can, in fact, give them constructive credit because, if nothing else, the exposure to the process and the requirements of that process when those capabilities do exist are going to lead to a better understanding of the integration of combined arms operations, which is really what we're getting after, right? Thanks.
But to answer your question, I'd be happy to see that talk and kind of bring some ideas. Again, I'm inherently limited just by myself, just who I am. Not a smart man, just live type of things. But we can sit down and kind of based on what we've seen, talk through, hey, here's some ways we can potentially mitigate some of these things. Or if we can't, underwrite the risk and say, hey, boss, just so you know, like, these are some areas that we're not going to be able to mitigate. Elevate that to higher action. So they're aware of it. They're not signing up for risk or something. Great question. Any other questions across this board? I know this is one where we're kind of explaining, so we're talking a lot. But I'd be open to any other questions, feedback, questions about how we're organized, any capability gaps, anything else. Good.
So is MCTP for the active duty similar to the MCTP as far as structure? Because it seems like the S portion of the MCTP is a lot lighter. I know we just worked with them this weekend. They came with a 3-man team to operate a high comm and some OCs. So we augmented them a little bit to try to enhance the exercise. But I think it would have been better played had I known sooner. And we've been coordinating with them through the unit we're working with. But seeing your structure, I'm pretty sure they're structured that same way or as enhanced as you all are. I'm just curious what that.
To clarify the question, when you say you're talking about MCTP device, MCTSP?
Yes.
Okay. We'll have to get back to that because I'm not super familiar with the MCTSP sustainment structure that it looks like. Dave, I don't know if you've got any experience or thoughts on this. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but we'll talk about it later. Okay. No, fair question. Okay. Anything else? Go ahead. Yeah.
So again, not no need an answer here, but something as we go through, I'll be interested in kind of how best recommendations for gathering and kind of managing an analyst cell that basically gets at kind of that AAR support. How are we developing our collection plans that help us assign how we're covering things so that we can get into meetings that address the training objectives that are laid out so that we can answer questions, provide objective feedback, objective observations during the AARs, and compile that stuff. That's definitely a major gap, I think, that we have, that we gotta look at closely to see how we manage that.
No, that's a fair question. The two briefs on the last day, they talk about AAR facilitation and exercise design. Those two briefs are expressly designed to kind of address those questions. So I don't want to say, like, hey, we get the slide come up, let the slide come up in a couple of days. But if you've got a question that, like, by all means, like, bring it up, and we'll address it, or, frankly, I think I agree with that, so we can refine it as well. We're not answering this question. But it is a good question, and for everyone here, we need to be thinking about, like, how are we going to collect and understand what we're supposed to collect against, right? That's kind of the gist of what we're doing that. Because the part of the problem, and you'll see this as we talk about this in a couple of days. Look, you're going to kick off on day one, and you've already got to start formulating your AAR comments. You've got to start on day two, or it's like a 5-day exercise. You've got to be building and getting those 50% solutions on your AAR slides. So that's going to require some deliberate understanding of what your themes are and collection against that to confirm or deny those themes. Make sense? But with that being said, next slide. Gentlemen, I know you've had a chance to kind of talk throughout. Colonel Manager, any final closing thoughts?
So the last one I'll make is get into doctrine, okay? And we'll cover it more as we go here. But FM 3.0 has been updated, right? The draft is out there on the street. Just try to always spend, I tell my guys, spend an hour a day. An hour a day looking at your warfighting function and the doctrine that's being put out. If you can do that, you have a frame of reference to start from. Units will make stuff up in the absence of not understanding doctrine or not knowing, right? And you guys have seen this at multiple echelons. It's like, I use the analogy like the platoon leader, the lieutenant that goes out to the range to run the M4 range and doesn't know that there's a whole manual out there on how to run an M4 range. So he's out there, doing the Lord's work and makes up this whole thing that looks very similar to the doctrine, but if he would have started from this known point, his life would have been easier and he could have focused on getting further down the line. So just know doctrine, get into doctrine, so that you have a start point with the unit and you can start coaching them early, on what's out there, what can help them, what can put a framework on it. So when they do shift, which they will, for all the right reasons, they're shifting from a known point.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Get into doctrine. What may help is if you start with the tactical doctrine. I know that MCTP is going to provide several references as they go through these classes, but start with the doctrine that's within whichever section, organization, division, inside the division that you're covering down on, that you're supporting. And again, everybody is qualified to execute this job, whether you realize it or not. Even though you haven't worked on a division staff, I will say from my experience, right, I've worked on a lot of staffs, ASCC, HQDA, battalion, brigade, division staffs, and inevitably the thing that I always come back around to is that my job as a staff officer looks largely the same regardless of the context that it's in. And so just understand that your counterpart is going to be asked to do something similar to, but in a different context from other staffs that you may or may not have served in. If you haven't been in a staff, you do have a bit of a steep climb ahead of you, but that's okay. You can still understand what you need to understand to be value added for 28. So the 6.0 is a good reference point. 6.0 gives you grounding in sort of the mission command, and as they talk to what the objectives CPX 1, 2, and 3 are going to look like, so you can kind of understand what we're getting after with respect to division. Look at division operations and look in the tactics manuals to kind of help you understand what a division is being asked to do. They'll provide some of the references. My challenge to you all is to get a hold of the references and dive into the references and start coming into it with a bit of a doctrinal background. We'll give you some reps and sets. We have 22-4 coming up, which some of you will be part of. We'll have CPX 1 and 2, 42nd ID, we'll do a Staff X. So we'll have some opportunities to see divisions and give yourself a little bit of a learning opportunity prior to going live, CPX3, and just as importantly, if not more so, for the CTE come September, October. So that's kind of the teaser of where we're going, what we're going to be asking all of you to do for the most part that's sitting in this room. Again, you can all do it. Don't be intimidated by the fact that you've never been in a division. Okay, you could be value added. So my challenge to you is you do the homework, you do what you need to do to prepare to do it, and you step in prepared as you can be to help the 28. Okay?
Okay. Hey, team, with that, we're a few minutes ahead of schedule, so it is now